Good morning, everybody. We're going to do another episode in our series on the subject of the King James Bible. We're not just referring to this book alone, we'll be referring to other books later on. But we want to talk today about the Bible, the translation, and its interpretation. Now, the Reformation urged all Christians to read and to value the Bible and to act upon what they found within its pages. People needed to have help to make sense of the Bible because the ideas conveyed in the Bible were complex and they often needed explanation. It's a rather sweet idea to think that all we have to do is to just give people a Bible and they're going to be fine. The Bible needs to be explained. You remember that incident in the life of Philip when he met the Ethiopian eunuch? He said, "Do you understand what you read?" And he said, "How can I unless somebody helps me?" And so he went up into the chariot to explain it. So the Bible was not perhaps as straightforward as some might have thought. There were hard places. To borrow a phrase that could be used by the Geneva Bible, that puzzled and perplexed readers. And translation of the Bible was not just enough. It needed to be supplemented by explanation. This is precisely what was provided by the Geneva Bible in 1560. It offered both the best English translation of the biblical text then available, along with copious marginal notes designed to allow its readers to make sense of what they read in the biblical text itself. The immense success of this work, which is beyond dispute, clearly shows that the work met a real need and met it very effectively. So we're now going to talk about the Geneva Bible primarily. Now, the Geneva Bible was generally agreed to have been mainly the work of William Whittingham, 1524 to 1579, who was assisted by Anthony Gilby and Thomas Sampson. It's also thought that Miles Coverdale and John Knox and Lawrence Thompson were involved, although the extent to which they contributed is difficult to know. Whittingham was elected a fellow of All Souls College, Oxford in 1545. His Protestant views led him to flee England under Mary Tudor and settle in the city of Frankfurt. The English congregation in Frankfurt had established in April 1554 by a group of French Protestants originally based at Glastonbury, but who fled England, and the minister of the church was Valmont Pugh, and he urged his congregation to welcome others who would flee England on account of their religious beliefs. Now, while they were there, a ferocious debate broke out over whether the 1552 prayer book of Edward VI should be used or not, and the debate split the congregation and led to a continued bitterness over issues including both matters of liturgy and theology, and would erupt again in England during the reign of Elizabeth and beyond. And Whittingham and Gilby were both involved in what came to be known as the Troubles of Frankfurt. Now, following the Frankfurt controversy, Whittingham and Gilby settled in Geneva under John Knox as the pastor of the English church in the city. Calvin's Geneva provided a place of safety for the refugees. Whittingham's relationship with Calvin went considerably beyond that, of an appreciative theological apprentice. He appears to have married Calvin's sister, or perhaps sister-in-law, and the English Protestant community in Geneva proved to be especially close-knit and avoided the divisions and bitterness of immigrant communities in other European cities. Now, his first major work contributing to the Englishing, as he called it, of the Bible was his English New Testament, published in 1557. This work was largely derivative, being based primarily on Tyndale's English translation. However, there were significant modifications introduced. Calvin's colleague, Theodore Beza had published a new Latin translation of the New Testament in 1556, which was available to Whittingham. So Whittingham chose to abandon the use of the English term congregation. He translated the Greek word ecclesia to replace it with the more nuanced term church. The earlier English translations of the New Testament had referred collectively to the letters of James, Peter, John, Jude as the as the Catholic epistles, and Whittingham established the practice of referring to them as the general epistles. Interesting though this work was, it was to be judged to be little more than an anticipation of the greater work, the greater work of the King James Version. In 1558, Mary Tudor died. A surge of relief was experienced throughout the English Protestant communities abroad when it became clear that her successor, Elizabeth, appeared sympathetic to Protestantism. The Marian exiles realized that their moment had come. They would return to England, and the Elizabethan settlement of religion of 1559 seemed to guarantee a position for Protestantism in England. And so it's very interesting that what Elizabeth was trying to do was to walk a fine line between Catholicism and Protestantism, and she tried to keep both sides on board. And around about this time, there was the Gunpowder Plot, which we'll talk about in detail later. So the title page of Whittingham's translation of the Bible read as follows: "The Bible, the Holy Scriptures, contained in the Old and New Testament, translated according to the Hebrew and Greek, and conferred with the best translations in diverse languages, with most profitable annotations upon all the hard places and other things of great importance, as may appear in the epistle to the reader. Fear not, stand still, and behold the salvation of the Lord, which he will show you this day." Exodus, at Geneva, printed by Rowland Hall. So the reference to Geneva on the title page explains why this became known as the Geneva Bible. It never had his name put to it. It never had anybody's name, but because it mentioned the word Geneva, Geneva is the word that stuck. Now, the Geneva printers, Robert Essienne and Jean Girard, had produced Bibles in Roman rather than black letter type since 1534. The old Germanic appearance of the black letter Bibles, such as that of Gutenberg, gave way to the more modern style. The older black letter type was modelled on a written script and was not very easy to read, whereas the Roman type, in contrast, was very much clearer, making reading, public or private, considerably more pleasant and a less demanding process. Increasingly, the older black letter type began to be regarded as archaic in England. Now, in addition, in the New Testament, published in 1551, Essienne introduced the practice of numbering individual verses and dividing the passages in those verses. In effect, each verse therefore became a new line, which was a development that seriously interrupted the flow of the text and failed to take into account the frequently unsatisfactory division of the text into verses. The technique also made it impossible to distinguish between prose and poetry, in that both were presented in exactly the same way. 2 years later, Essienne issued a complete French translation of the Bible, the first to use the chapter and verse division throughout. The basic format that would follow by the English translation of 1560 was therefore in place by 1553. Now, the supporters of the Geneva Bible were convinced that it outperformed the competition at every point. Every feature of the Bible and in its printing was better in the Geneva Bible than any other. One of the former Marian exiles in Geneva who stood to benefit most from this was John Bodley, who secured a license to print the Geneva Bible under church supervision for a period of 7 years. The Archbishop of Canterbury and York indicated that they were prepared to extend this for a further 12 years under certain conditions. Confident of its adoption in England, John Bodley arranged for a folio edition of the work to be published, and this much larger size being suitable for use on lecterns and in churches. The 1560 edition came out. It was a very attractive typeface. It was compact. It was a quarto size rather than folio. It was convenient for personal and family use, and the English translation itself was probably the best of its day. The biblical text was broken down into individual verses, and words that were introduced into the text yet had no direct equivalent in the original were printed in italic. Now, this was a convention that was introduced by Bodley at this early stage, it meant that all subsequent Geneva Bibles then became of a much smaller size, and also it was immediately apparent when you were reading what extra words the translators had put in to make it sound good in English. Now, most people are not aware of this, but the translators have put in a very, very large number of extra words into the text to try to make it make sense in English. However, they don't always indicate which words are added. The most important and attractive features of the Geneva Bible were the illustrations and the prefaces and the annotations and the marginal notes. Also, at one particular time, they offered maps to accompany the descriptions of lands and journeys and to depict the various matters of interest. For example, there were pictures of the high priest of Israel. So there were pictures of the Ark of the Covenant. And these things were very, very attractive to the reader. Now, let me read a little passage. It says, "Whereas certain places in the book of Moses and of the Kings and Ezekiel seemed so dark that no description that could be made would make it easier to the simple reader, we have set them forth with figures and notes for a full declaration thereof, that they, as it were, by the eye may sufficiently know the true meaning of all such places. Whereunto we have added certain maps of cosmology, which necessarily serve to the perfect understanding and memory of diverse places and countries, partly described and partly occasionally touched, both in the Old and the New Testament." Now, the prefaces aim to explain what the individual books taught. So every book in the Bible had a preface, had an introduction. This was something that was a new thing, and it was exceptionally beneficial. There were also marginal notes, which proved to be of supreme importance in the great religious controversies of the Elizabethan and Jacobean England. Whereas Tyndale had assumed, quite hopelessly, optimistically, as it proved, that the Bible once translated could easily be understood by the ploughboy. The Geneva Bible explicitly recognized that there were difficult places, and that is, passages of the Bible that needed explanation. Now, there's lots of illustrations given in this book of the various things that we're talking about. But let me just go on to say that by providing such explanations in plain English, the Geneva Bible secured its position as the market leader. It was far in advance of all other books at the time. Now, the initial Elizabethan response to the Geneva Bible is what we're going to talk about next. And the English reforms introduced by Elizabeth I in 1559 included explicit demands that both an English Bible should be set up in every parish church and that no person should be inhibited from reading such Bibles. But the question is, which version? You see, the Great Bible, which appeared in 1539, was last printed in 1553 and shortly before Mary Tudor's accession, and it seems that many copies of this printing survived Mary's reign. There is ample documentary evidence that this version was initially installed in churches. Demand was such that it was printed in the folio edition in 1562 and 1566. Aware of the importance of the religious reforms introduced by Elizabeth, Whittingham included a dedicatory epistle to the English monarch, praising her explicitly for her many religious virtues. Whittingham wanted his Bible to be the choice of to be used in English churches. The Geneva Bible was studiously ignored by the authorities of the Church of England. The truth is that they felt threatened by it. That's the point. It was clear that Archbishop Matthew Parker disliked the Geneva Bible, not on account of the translation that it offered, but because of the notes that accompanied it. Like Matthew's Bible before it, the Geneva Bible alienated the establishment on account of its marginal notes. So that's a great lesson for everybody to know. Parker also commented that it would do much good to have diversity of translations and readings, and Parker devised a way to destroy the sales and influence of the Geneva Bible. He would produce a translation of the Bible based on the Great Bible. The translators were given strict instructions that they were only to depart from the Great Bible when it was strictly necessary, and they were to avoid any form of discussion or controversial issues in any of the annotations of the text. And writing to Elizabeth in 1566, Parker complained bitterly about the prejudicial notes of the earlier translations. What Parker disliked, of course, was much appreciated by his critics, and the reading public were obstinately kept on buying the Geneva Bible. Geneva's Bible annotations, in effect, offered an interpretation of certain biblical passages that contradicted what was found in the Book of Homilies. Now, you need to understand the Book of Homilies is a series of sermons which were designated to be preached at various times of the year. And Parker intended to ensure that the Bibles set up in churches for the purpose of reading aloud and the sermons preached upon themes or biblical passages were in line with the teaching of the newly established Church of England. The Elizabethan settlement of religion was a delicate creature. The English National Church would have an essentially Catholic structure. For example, they would retain clerical robes, they would retain bishops, while adopting a basically Protestant set of beliefs, as set out in the 39 Articles of Religion. The Protestants were inclined to accept it on the basis of the hope that further concessions would be made at a later date. Now, the 39 Articles of Religion, for example, took a strongly Protestant position on matters of doctrine, rejecting many Catholic teachings. But the structure of the church itself remained Catholic in its orientation. Now, there are a lot of very significant things. I think as historians, we need to really understand what were the idiosyncrasies of the settlement. Now, Parker's anxieties over Geneva Bible were very well founded, as can be seen from the behaviour of its chief translator, William Whittingham. On his return to England from Geneva, Whittingham was appointed Dean of Durham. However, he proved to be a difficult man. He proved to be very obstinate in his views, and in the end, the king had only one option, and that was to sack him. Okay. However, Whittingham died just before he was sacked, so that put an end to all controversy. Now, the Geneva Bible triumphed over everything. Official opposition to the Geneva Bible could not prevent it from becoming the most widely read Bible of the Elizabethan and the Jacobean era. Throughout his long period as Archbishop of Canterbury, Matthew Parker was able to block any efforts by the Stationers' Company. The Worshipful Company of Stationers was a professional guild that controlled the publishing of manuscripts and later printed books in England. He managed to prevent the printing of the English Bible and ensured that the monopoly for printing was officially approved translation, which at this time was the Bishop's Bible. The Bishop's Bible of 1568. One of Barker's most significant innovations was the production of a composite version of the Geneva Bible. It included modifications of the translation in English based on the work of Lawrence Thompson and a member of the English community of Marian exiles, and his notes to the New Testament, which in turn based on commentaries by the German theologian, the Genevan theologian Theodor Beza. Therefore, a number of variants in the text, and there were a number of variants in the text, and all of them styled themselves in the Geneva Bible. In the end, there were 58 editions of the Bible printed between 1583 and 1603, published in England. 58 editions of the Bible. It's not many Bibles being published, is it, in those years? However, 7 of them were the Bishop's Bible, but 51 of them were the Geneva Bible. So you can see its popularity. There was no doubt which version had secured the loyalty of the English Protestants. Now, paradoxically, the translation was so good that even establishment figures found themselves drawn to it. Archbishop Wycliffe found himself using the Geneva Bible in his heated controversy with the Puritans, and the irony of this was not lost on the people. People understood. He didn't like it, but he still used it. By 1600, the Geneva Bible had become the Bible of choice of all English-speaking Protestants. It was entirely natural that John Knox, the moving light of the Scottish Reformation, should have pressed for the introduction of the Geneva Bible as the authorized version of the Reformed Church of Scotland. Now, England was a Protestant nation, and the Geneva Bible was its sacred book. So it was natural that when William Shakespeare began his playwriting, he would quote from the Geneva Bible. So he would quote from the Geneva Bible. And there was a question, might not the Geneva Bible become the King James Version? And that's a very interesting question. It didn't become the King James Version. In fact, the new King of England had no interest in promoting the Geneva Bible. His secret agenda was to destroy it, to discredit it, and to displace it, whichever could be done most quickly. So that was James's attitude to the Geneva Bible, in spite of the fact that Elizabeth I used the Geneva Bible every day of her life. He decided that he would act against it. Well, we'll come back to this subject another day, and we look forward to catching up with you. And please like and subscribe, and that will be helpful to us. Have a great day. Bye for now.